Today we're going to be talking about the molecule of water. And as we know, water is fundamental to life for several reasons. We have a lot of organisms that live in aqueous solution, which is mainly going to be water. And we also have water inside of most organisms. We as humans, depending on who you ask, estimates range from somewhere from 60 to 70% of what makes us up is water. So let's take a look at the molecule of water and see why it's important and see why it's able to be such an integral part of so many different organisms. When you look at water, water is commonly referred to as H2O. It's called H2O because it contains 2 hydrogen atoms to 1 oxygen atom. It is always in a 2-to-1 ratio like that. So that's why we call water that way. Water overall is going to be a neutral molecule, so it doesn't have a charge, but it is polar. And polar molecules have some pretty interesting, they have some pretty interesting situations that they kind of create for molecules. So we're going to look at polar molecules and see why, in particular, that affects water. So with water being a polar molecule, what that means is the molecule has charges that are unevenly spread out. Okay, so as the opposite charges attract, oxygen is going to have a strong positive charge in its nucleus, and that pulls the electrons from the hydrogens and creates a slightly negative charge on the oxygen and a slightly positive charge on the hydrogens. What this does in effect is it causes water to be a polar molecule. And what polar molecules really do, especially with water, is it really causes them to act like small little magnets. Water molecules are attracted to one another because of this polarity. And so what we're seeing here is the negative end of the oxygen can be attracted to the positive end of the hydrogen, and then that attracts another molecule. So between all of those molecules, we're forming hydrogen bonds. Hydrogen bonds are found everywhere. Hydrogen bonds are the same bonds that hold DNA nucleotides together. The thing about hydrogen bonds is they're not incredibly strong, but they do give some special properties to water. And we're going to talk about those in just a minute. When we look at water, because of the way the bonds are and the polarity of the molecule, what we wind up with is we wind up with an oxygen molecule there in the middle, and we wind up with hydrogen molecules that kind of sit like little mouse ears on top of the oxygen. And that's how water is always going to be seen. And so these charges here are going to attract other molecules. And so this is why we see water, when you put it into a container, water is going to take the shape of that container. Water is going to seek its own level. Water is going to do all of those things because of the polarity of the molecules making up the liquid. When you look at ice, the bonds in ice are very stable. And in liquid, they're further apart, and they're constantly breaking and rebonding. So what I mean by that is when you're moving water around in a container, certain molecules will separate from one another, and the water will move over here, and then the water will move back. So you're constantly reforming these bonds between these polar molecules. The special properties that are given to water because of the polarity, in addition to seeking its own level and that sort of thing, there's 2 special properties that it gives water. One of them is what's called cohesion. And cohesion is the attraction between molecules of the same substance. So as I've said before, these molecules of water are attracted to one another. So water can have up to 4 bonds per molecule. So this is what causes surface tension. So you've seen surface tension in action before. If you have a surface, a bug is moving across it, right? It's just kind of scooting across the water. Because all of those molecules are held together through cohesion, that water sort of sticks together and it makes a surface. Now, if you drop something heavy, it's going to break through and it's not going to work. But if something, that surface tension allows certain bugs to glide across the surface of the water and take advantage of that cohesion. Another special property that we see in water is what's called adhesion. And adhesion is the attraction between molecules of different substances, okay? So when water is poured into a glass tube, it's poured into a beaker, it's poured into a cup, whatever it is, it's going to stick to the sides and the curves at the bottom. That's adhesion. So, when you pour water in and you see, maybe it splashes and you see the water dripping down the container, those molecules of water are sticking to the surface of the cup or the beaker or whatever it is that you've poured it into. Also, one of the things that you'll see because of adhesion, when you put water into a narrow tube and you can see water kind of pulled in one direction or another, that's called capillary action. If you've ever made a wet slide or a wet mount for a microscopic slide, and you place your slide is here, it's flat, and you place a drop of water on it, and then you will hold your slide cover at an angle, and you'll see that water kind of draw together and flatten out. That's that capillary action. This is the same thing that we're going to see in roots of plants. This is how they get the water from their roots up to the stems. They're going to use that capillary action and draw the water up from the ground. So again, these two properties allow water to do a lot of different things. Water is like, again, it's one of the, it's, we call it the universal solvent. Things are dissolved in it. Most solutions, whether it's something that you can drink or whether it's something that's, organisms are living in, most of that is water. It's like 95% or higher, right? So water is everywhere, and it's because it has all of these amazing properties. In addition to cohesion and adhesion, water also has a very high heat capacity, okay? And what that means is when you take water and you add heat to it, you add energy to it, it takes an awful lot of energy to get that body of water to heat up. And if you've ever gone into a pool early in the spring, you know this is true. So you fill up a pool and wait a day, the sun's been shining on it, you jump into the pool and it's still very, very cold. Because water has this high heat capacity, it takes an awful lot of energy to warm the water up. And that is simply because the molecules must move more quickly. And with the hydrogen bonds, it causes the water not to move as quickly, right? So we know that in a liquid, solid ice, the molecules are not moving a whole lot. They're just kind of jiggling. And as they start to get more and more energy, they move more and more, and that warms the water up. Because of these hydrogen bonds, you don't get as much movement as fast. And so it takes a lot to warm water up. So it requires more energy to heat the water up. This works really well for us as human beings because we have so much water in our body. This really helps act as a buffer for body temperature. Our body temperatures are usually around 98.6 degrees. If we didn't have as much water in our bodies as we do, when we stepped outside on a very cold day, our body temperature would plummet. Now we have skin and we have fat for insulation and all that stuff, but the water inside of our bodies really helps from those giant fluctuations that we would see when we're exposed to hot environments or cold environments, because it works both ways. It takes a lot of energy to warm up water, but water doesn't lose energy nearly as quickly. So once you get that water warmed up, then it's going to stay that temperature. Okay. We've talked before with water and being, if something is going to go into a cell, it's going to be dissolved. And if it's going to be dissolved, most likely it's going to be dissolved in water or something that is primarily water. And we call that a solution. So we've taken solutes, whether it be sugars or salts or any type of nutrient or food that the cell needs, it's going to be dissolved into a solution. Once it's in a solution, then that material can be brought into the cell through the cell membrane. We're not just going to be bringing solid chunks of stuff through the cell membrane, because remember, those spaces are very, very small, and they're only going to allow dissolved substances to enter the cell. So again, water has an enormous range of properties that make it a pretty much unmatched substance for living materials, whether the organisms are going to be living in the solution, whether they're going to rely on it for substance like we do, right? We have to have lots and lots of water in our bodies to prevent hydration. And that's really at the cellular level. When our cells need water, we're experiencing that thirst. So all organisms rely on water. You can go much longer without food than you can water, simply because of the importance of water. So we've shown that water, because of its polarity, because of this adhesion and cohesion, makes it an unrivaled molecule in the natural world.